In the final days of February 1995, the global financial system watched an impossible math equation finalize. Barings Bank was 233 years old. It was the oldest merchant bank in London. It had financed the Louisiana Purchase. It had funded the British war effort against Napoleon. It managed the personal accounts of Queen Elizabeth II. It was a trusted pillar of the establishment, operating with an aura of absolute invincibility. Its collapse was unthinkable. And in the space of a single weekend, it ceased to exist. It was not destroyed by a global depression, a sovereign default, or a systemic market crash. It was destroyed by a 28-year-old employee sitting at a desk 6,000 miles away in Singapore. The bank's total capital reserves were wiped out, replaced by an £827 million black hole. The Queen did not lose her net worth, but the institution entrusted with her wealth evaporated. How does an empire of finance, built over 2 centuries, die in a matter of hours? The answer lies not in grand economic shifts, but in the mundane mechanics of back-office accounting, an invisible error account, and the lethal ignorance of executives who authorized hundreds of millions in wire transfers without understanding what they were buying. This is the anatomy of a localized financial detonation, a structural failure that allowed one junior trader to hijack the balance sheet of an institution that survived 2 world wars, only to be sold to a Dutch conglomerate for a single British pound.
To understand how Barings died, you have to look at what it was trying to become. For most of its history, Barings operated on the currency of relationships. It was a blue-blood institution. Its partners were aristocrats, men who valued quiet stability over aggressive expansion. But by the late 1980s, the City of London was transforming. Deregulation had unleashed a new era of hyper-competitive global banking. American investment banks were storming Europe, armed with complex mathematical instruments and a ruthless appetite for risk. Barings faced a brutal choice: evolve or become obsolete. They chose to expand, launching a securities arm to trade equities and derivatives in emerging markets. Asia was the frontier. Tokyo and Singapore were booming, offering massive margins for banks willing to navigate their fast-paced exchanges. But Barings was a conservative merchant bank, wearing the clothes of a modern casino. Its senior executives in London understood traditional bonds and corporate advisory. They did not understand the granular mechanics of derivative arbitrage, futures contracts, or the high-speed settlement systems of the Singapore International Monetary Exchange, known as SIMEX. This knowledge gap created a fatal blind spot. In finance, when management does not understand how profit is generated, they rarely question it until the profit stops. Barings executives wanted the high returns of the Asian markets, but failed to build the necessary compliance infrastructure to monitor those bets. They built a powerful engine, but forgot to install the brakes. In 1992, they sent a young clerk named Nick Leeson to Singapore. His mandate was simple: clean up a backlog of unsettled trades and get the local office running smoothly. He was not a senior partner. He was not a financial engineer. He was a back-office settlement clerk. But within a year, the boundaries between the back office and the trading floor would dissolve. Barings authorized Leeson to execute trades, theoretically to capitalize on tiny price differences between the Singapore and Osaka exchanges, a strategy known as arbitrage. It was supposed to be low risk. Buy low in one market, sell high in the other, instantly locking in a profit. To execute this, the bank gave him capital. But crucially, they did not take away his control of the settlement desk. The architecture of trust was broken. The golden rule of banking is segregation of duties. The person who makes the trades cannot be the same person who settles the trades and reports the losses. But in Singapore, Barings let one man do both. Nick Leeson was an anomaly in the aristocratic halls of Barings. Raised in a working-class family in Watford, he had not attended Oxford or Cambridge. He bypassed the traditional polished track, entering banking straight out of school, navigating the unglamorous plumbing of financial settlements. He was driven, sharp, and hungry for status. In Singapore, he found an environment where performance overrode pedigree. SIMEX was a loud, aggressive trading floor. Success was measured entirely by the daily profit and loss sheet. Leeson quickly established himself. He passed his trading exams and began executing arbitrage strategies on Nikkei 225 futures. By 1993, he was reporting massive profits back to London. He accounted for 10% of Barings' entire global profit that year. To the senior executives in London, Leeson was a prodigy. They rewarded him with immense bonuses and unparalleled autonomy. The failure was not just one of software, but of human psychology. Management wanted to believe in the prodigy. They wanted the numbers to be real. But the profits were an illusion. Arbitrage requires perfect execution. When Leeson or his junior traders made a mistake, buying when they should have sold or mispricing a contract, they faced immediate losses. Rather than report these errors and damage his reputation as the bank's star earner, Leeson exploited his dual role. Because he controlled the back office, he could hide the evidence. He revived an obscure, dormant error account. The account number was 88888. In Chinese numerology, 8 represents wealth and prosperity. Inside Barings Singapore, it became a financial mass grave. Leeson began funneling all trading losses into the 88888 account. By the end of 1992, the hidden losses were £2 million. A year later, they had swollen to £23 million. Every day, he fabricated reports to London, showing spectacular profits on his official trading accounts, while secretly burying the mounting deficits in the 88888 ledger. He was no longer doing arbitrage. He was nakedly speculating, betting on the direction of the Japanese stock market to earn back the money he had already lost. London saw only the fake profits. They did not ask how one trader was generating such extraordinary, risk-free returns. They simply applauded. When Leeson requested more cash to meet margin calls for his supposedly risk-free trades, the executives in London wired the funds without hesitation.
The escalation was mathematical and relentless. By late 1994, the 8888 account held a staggering £208 million in hidden losses. Leeson was trapped in a classic gambler's spiral. To recover a loss of that magnitude, small, safe bets were useless. He needed massive, leveraged, directional bets. He heavily bought futures contracts on the Nikkei 225, betting that the Japanese stock market would rise. He also sold options, known as straddles, betting that the market would remain stable and trade within a narrow band. It was a strategy that generated immediate cash premiums, but exposed the bank to unlimited risk if the market moved violently in either direction. Back in London, the warning lights were flashing, but nobody was looking. Internal audits flagged the lack of segregation of duties in Singapore. The Bank of England had warned Barings about its heavy exposure to the Asian exchanges, yet the executives silenced the alarms. Leeson was their golden goose. To question him was to jeopardize the bonus pool. They continued to wire tens of millions of pounds across the world to fund his margin requirements, believing they were financing client trades and risk-free arbitrage. Then came the external shock. On January 17, 1995, the Earth ruptured beneath Japan. The Great Hanshin earthquake struck the city of Kobe. Buildings collapsed, infrastructure was decimated, thousands died. The economic fallout was immediate. The Nikkei 225 plunged as investors realized the catastrophic cost of rebuilding. For Leeson, the earthquake was a fatal blow. His massive, leveraged bets on a stable, rising Japanese market were suddenly deeply underwater. The 8888 account began hemorrhaging cash at an unprecedented rate. Rationality evaporated. Instead of closing his positions and accepting defeat, Leeson doubled down. He believed the market was wrong and would eventually rebound. Over the next few weeks, he executed a desperate, massive buying spree, purchasing more Nikkei futures in a frantic attempt to single-handedly support the Japanese stock market. He was using Barings capital to fight gravity. Every contract he purchased pushed the bank closer to the abyss, but the internal reporting systems in London continued to show a healthy, thriving subsidiary. The margin calls from Cymex became astronomical. Leeson requested more and more cash from London. In a final act of institutional blindness, Barings executives drained the bank's global liquidity. They pulled funds from every available division, stripping the institution of its cash, and wired hundreds of millions of pounds to Singapore. By February 23, the sheer scale of the margin requirements broke the system. Leeson could no longer invent lies fast enough to secure the cash. The charade was over. He walked off the trading floor, boarded a flight to Malaysia, and left a note on his desk reading, "I am sorry." The delay in discovering the truth was almost as shocking as the fraud itself.
For days, London executives believed they were just facing a temporary liquidity crunch. When they finally sent a team to bypass Leeson and look directly into the Singapore settlement accounts, they found a crater. The losses stood at £827 million. It was more than twice the bank's available capital. The institution was entirely insolvent. The sheer velocity of the destruction paralyzed the City of London.
Over a frantic weekend, the Bank of England attempted to organize a bailout. The governor summoned the heads of Britain's major financial institutions, pleading for a rescue package to prevent systemic contagion. But when the rival bankers examined Barings' books, they recoiled. The exposure was too vast, the risk too unquantifiable. No one would catch the falling knife. The bailout failed. On February 26, 1995, Barings Bank officially entered administration. 2 centuries of financial history extinguished by one ledger in Singapore. The aftermath was swift and humiliating. Days after the collapse, the Dutch bank ING purchased the hollowed-out remains of Barings Bank for the symbolic price of £1, assuming its massive liabilities. The Queen's personal wealth remained intact, transferred safely away from the wreckage, but the historic institution that had guarded it was dead. Nick Leeson was arrested in Germany, extradited to Singapore, and sentenced to 6.5 years in Changi Prison for forgery and fraud. But the collapse of Barings was never just a story of one rogue trader. Leeson was merely the mechanism. The true failure was structural. Barings died because its leadership constructed a machine they did not understand, driven by incentives they could not control. They rewarded aggressive profit while actively ignoring the risk required to generate it. The executives who wired hundreds of millions of pounds to a 28-year-old clerk without verifying the underlying assets were never criminally charged. They simply lost their jobs, their equity, and the institution their ancestors had built. The disaster forced a violent reckoning across the global financial sector. Banks worldwide scrambled to enforce the segregation of duties, strictly separating the front office from the back office. Regulators tightened capital requirements and modernized cross-border auditing. But the psychological scar remained. The Barings collapse proved that in the era of digital finance, distance and complexity are lethal.